Deleted session, November 29, 1971. Monday. Ram noted, at supper this evening, Jane and I had a very productive discussion about personal problems. It continued in the session this evening. They said, "Good evening. Now, there are some further points, unrecognized items that we have not touched upon. They are very important and play their part in Ruber's attitudes. I am pointing out patterns now that he has not recognized. They exerted force because he was not consciously aware of them, nor ready to face them in those terms. Some of these will go a good way in explaining portions of his behavior. If you have questions, ask when I have finished." He felt as a child now that he had no rights. Nothing was his by rights. Anything could be taken from him at any time. While he lived in one house, still the home itself was always in jeopardy. His mother frequently told him that she would keep him only if he was good, that only Marie's good graces kept the child from going to an asylum. The mother's affections were not the child's by right, but dependent upon how well the child cared or performed. As has been noted, all normal aggressive feelings toward the mother had to be masked. The mother frequently took away gifts that she had given the child when the child misbehaved, making it clear that even these were not the child's by right. Only poetry seemed Ruber's by right. In the convent home, as you know, letters were censored, and only positive statements got through the censor. The child feared punishment there by giving voice to any complaint. Ruber grew up then, without daring to ask for anything. Welfare, who gave, always threatened to take away. They were afraid as well as a sustenance. The college scholarship was not Ruber's by right, but could also be taken away. To a large extent, in even small things therefore, he felt he had no rights per se, no right to ask you for example for anything. Remember early tales. He tells about feeling guilty for buying a lipstick. Before tonight's session, he mentioned that the class wine was gone. He meant obviously that it must be replaced, but would never directly ask to do so, feeling he had no right. This explains much of his behavior in terms of spending money at the store and so forth. Give us time. He did not feel that any love was his by right, yours or anyone else's. Therefore, he did not feel worthy of it, and in the face of any difficulty between you, he suspected it. Though then, that you no longer loved him. To voice any dissatisfaction to you verbally was highly difficult, for you could then take away your love and affection, as his mother did, for she would not stand, in Ruber's eyes, for such voiced aggression. He had to be quiet, therefore, to preserve your love. The backed-up feelings helped bring about the rigidity over a period of time. He was operating to a large degree according to the code long set down by his grandfather. Be quiet, do not argue, be aloof, and above all, never raise your voice. It seemed the only safe policy. Policy, however, shadowed everything he did, for he carried it into every activity. Whenever he thought anything differently than the opinions you voiced, he felt inward and refused to express himself, regardless of the issue involved. Its triviality or its importance. As mentioned earlier in other sessions, he felt, erroneously, for some time, that your love for him depended upon his performance as a writer and in sessions, since it could not be his by right. He had to test the love level by skipping sessions to see if you still loved him. If you objected, it meant you did not. If you did not object, it meant you did not care for the sessions. In the psychic realm, therefore, he dared not voice any feelings that you did not voice. The unvoiced fear always was that you would abandon him because he had no rights. The habits, however, became strong through the years, the reasons largely forgotten, and for that matter no longer vital, but active. Your going to the store for him without asking proves that you love him. He would never ask you to do anything for him, for he felt he had no right to do so, or to your love. He needed a strong excuse, therefore, in order to ask you to do anything. One excuse was that he could not do it himself. He was afraid that you did not love and cherish him for himself, and too embarrassed, rigid, and proud to continue seeking assurances from you, as he used to do. The symptoms, beside other sessions, have been a crying out to you for a love he feels he does not deserve but needs, a love he feared you could forget. He feared always that you would go your way in your work and life, and emotionally leave him alone. He could not bear that eventuality. The symptoms also served to punish you for making him go to such extremes, because physically they obviously hampered the expression of that love. He is possessive and jealous, and gave you his entire loyalty. He was afraid you would flee as your father fled. He would not, in course, humiliate himself to his way of thinking by crying after you, hammering at your door. He transferred the entire dilemma to the physical realm. The term, "would back to health," is an excellent one, quite apropos to a large extent in all such conditions, and operating beneath most symptoms despite their nature. Now, part of this was quite unrealistic, based on old ideas of his, part of it from the interaction of your natures. Our sessions are extremely legitimate. From what you would call a psychic viewpoint, you are reaching dimensions very seldom reached. They also served psychological purposes, of course. Ruber hoped they would bring the two of you closer together after your illness. Instead, he feared that they drove you farther apart. In that, he feared you would use them to spend time away from him rather than with him, and in that, he did not feel able to express his own ambiguous feelings. The ideas of performance entering in here. On one level, Then the sessions were an attempt to retain your love and give him a right to it. Hence, his later feelings that you loved him only for the sessions carried a certain charge. Now, this is one of the most important sessions you have been given on your own affairs. I suggest a break. He would quite literally do anything to retain your love. Hence, his feelings sometimes let you send him out on this psychic pilgrimage. This feeling, however, having its roots in lack of rights and his alliance with you, also provides him with the unity upon which his life is based, the poetry, the psychic work, and yourself. A trio, you see. Now, take your break. Now, let us get through what we can before the two of you get involved in a discussion. Rob said, we won't. Seth said, Rupert's sense of worth came from his writing self. There he felt on firm ground. It carried him through all of his early years. This belief in the writing self that automatically justified his existence and more than made up for any other lacks he felt. It made him then superior, and effectively hid the other sense of worthlessness. The writing self had always been both highly intuitive and highly questioning. The questioning of values, of neighborhood and church, allowed the intuitions to work and gave them freedom. The writing self, therefore, led the way also to the psychic developments. These were a natural extension. Though this was true, the writing self for the first time began to question itself, its achievements, and the new field it had entered. It had never questioned itself before. This brought forth some conflict, for the writing self had been Rupert's justification of your love. He had a right to it because he was a writer, not because he was himself. When he began to doubt the writing self in this new alliance with the psychic, then the framework became shaky. Some of this was a creative psychic and artistic endeavor that had to be worked through, whether or not it shook the foundations, you see. The writing self knew it needed something to write about, and greater maturity if it were to fulfill its abilities. And here again, the psychic development fulfilled a need. The writing self was led to extend its own substance, since Rupert felt your love was dependent on the outcome. This brought about certain difficulties. He was afraid shortly before our sessions began that you had largely lost your love for him, and he began frantically to initiate methods of ensuring it. The sessions were on the one hand a gift to you, by which means your health could be restored. He felt your physical withdrawal strongly during your illness previously, felt on several occasions physically attracted to other men, and became terrified. Watt did not want him physically, but he did not love Watt. He feared you were turning away from him in those terms. He was frightened that his sexual appetite would attract him to others and betray him. So he closed the door on it as best he could. There was also the idea of channeling that energy into our sessions. This, of course, at a deeper unconscious level. Instead, he felt that you enlarged upon the sessions so that they came before he did personally, that you demanded performance there in sessions, while not in bed. In an odd way, he felt that you used them against him. In other words, this during the time of tests in that area. He did not feel they had served that particular purpose. Yet, he felt the sessions too legitimate to drop them, and the psychic work too fascinating to disown. They seemed not to have brought you closer together, however, to him. Precisely at the time the strong symptoms began, the ESP book was slated for publication. You had received the cover, and the writing itself was facing its own conflicts also. Was the psychic work its nature fulfillment, or a distressed side trip? The two of you were not communicating well. He did not feel you were proud enough of that book. He was afraid it did not justify your love. His symptoms then began. The first strong changes came earlier when the young psychologist taught certain triggers, indicating that the sessions were a way of handling you, because amid all of the other motives and conditions, he knew they were also a method of keeping your love. This unconscious knowledge frightened him. He was afraid it meant that the sessions were just a fraudulent method of manipulating you, and hence not legitimate. This, of course, was not the case. Any money he made was always simply a way of winning your approval, in the terms that you wanted. He had many good ideas that he felt you would have been against that would have worked out very well, but he was afraid of going against you. Now, you were drawn to him because you sensed preciously that deep love of his and needed it to add to your own vitality and substance. If you were ever tempted, particularly in earlier times, to isolate yourself to an unhealthy degree, Rupert was precisely your insurance. You counted on him to call you back, to insist. You counted on that remedy. He was also your own insurance against being swallowed by your own parents, and he saved you from that possibility, which was present. You knew he would not allow it, while you gave yourself time to grow in understanding. Otherwise, you might well have continued your earlier performance and moved in with your parents to bail out your younger brother in a situation which would have then been present. The situation occurred in a facsimile, a lighter version. When Rupert felt his other efforts did not ensure what he wanted, he became highly frustrated and frightened. He alternately retreated from you in hurt bewilderment, railed at you silently, and still felt that what he wanted was not in your nature to give, and for that reason also he had no right to ask it. He felt guilty then at asking you to change your mode of behavior, and felt you would construe this to mean he was grasping and wanted all of you and meant to allow you no freedom, which again was not the case. No one had loved him at all, however. If getting sick ensured him a certain amount of your affection and notice, brought about gallant behavior, then he was willing to pay the price. Now, this early summer he improved, and to a large degree, for several reasons. His defiance was finally aroused. A sense of personal worth rushed to the surface, a sense of independence. The feeling, well, if you wanted to leave him, go ahead, all of which released some pressure. Besides this, during your vacation, you spent a lot of time and attention on him. You made love frequently and began an open communication area. The night of the Milligan party, he did very well. You spoke some words to him, mentioning that his performance still needed much more progress. Unfortunately, he took this to mean that you did not appreciate his efforts, did not love him, and cautioned him that he had better not give up those symptoms yet. I am going to suggest a break. If your hand is not tired, we will then continue, helpfully with suggestions. Now, are you ready for more? Rob said, yes. Seth said, there are several areas that can work great improvement. Basic communication has been difficult. This means you should try better to communicate your thoughts and feelings. You, then, say what naturally comes to mind and encourage Rupert to make any questions or comments. Feel free to say what is on your mind again. Discuss Rupert's interpretation. Several such freely entered encounters will show him practically the difference between your meaning and his interpretation. You are not to watch yourself. In other words, you should both take some time each day to freely discuss whatever personal issues are involved, to express yourselves personally to each other on whatever issues you want. For now, I recommend a definite certain amount of time on a regular basis. I cannot recommend this too strongly. Later, you will not need the time, per se. Communication will flow freely, but now you need it. Your afternoon activities today are but a hint of natural communications that you have both let lack. As you both ascertained, this is an excellent method. For one thing, the activity engages body, mind, and spirit in joyful pursuit. Spontaneity is encouraged. Physically, hormones and chemicals are brought into activity that are otherwise sluggish. It is not your role necessary to make up for the love Rupert did not have as a child. Yet, bodily caresses and fond verbal endearments provide him with exactly the kind of soothing, assuring elements that he needs, and that will result in health improvement. You may find his moods quickly changing under such circumstances. This should be encouraged. Physically, your touches activate portions of the body that have collected various feelings. Touching the physical portions help release the feelings. Aside from this, your own vitality will also be improved, and the situation with the penis relieved. Physical intercourse may or may not take place according to your moods, but the physical endearments and the feelings of closeness, being cherished and assured, are definitely important on Rupert's part. The period difficulty is connected here, and is a follow-through. As I explained earlier in other sessions, these are the two most important elements necessary now, and the steady but light use of the suggestions. Some of the material given tonight has been buried. Rupert did not want to face it. Have him read the session several times. You can woo him back to health. It may seem that you need not do this, that he should do it alone. But because your relationship is so involved, This is by far the procedure that will rouse his own desire for health. Do you follow me? Rob said, yes. Seth said, I am not saying therefore that the burden is on you to woo him back. It is good sense. The open communication will help immensely. It will help if you do not let him retreat from it when he is tempted by the old habit. Now, if you want the results, follow the suggestions. You may end the session. Ask questions, or if you prefer, list any questions you have between the session and the next to give you time to think. Rob said, we'll have to digest this material first, then. Seth said, then I bid you a fond good evening. Rob said, thank you, said good night. Rob noted, I thought the session was excellent.